You know what really sucked to get hit in the face by? A 5-finger death punch. Yeah, so this week I'm going to cast the logo, a 5-finger death punch. Of course, their logo is brass knuckles. In this case, it's going to be aluminum knuckles with spikes on it. I'd also like to say, I don't stand up for any violence. I duck. Well, enough with the dad jokes. So I'd like to talk about something else too. The other video I did was an F-bomb, which was this right here. And I made this, and a couple of my friends wanted to buy some off me, so I decided to go ahead and whenever I get a chance to do some casting, I'll probably go ahead and cast one of these along with it, since I got quite a few people asking for it. But I also went ahead and did a few modifications and made the F just a little bit lower and then tilted the sides just a little bit back, so I don't have the same problems where you can see that the sand got stuck in the crevices and didn't pull out correctly. And then also I made the tail fins just a little thicker on the new pattern, so that way the aluminum would have a chance to flow better in there. The F-bomb video that I did, my last video, was the weirdest video because I could tell people were confused as to what I posted. I don't think they quite knew what an F-bomb was. Because as soon as they got into the video, I could tell that they realized as soon as I started sand casting that they were looking for something else. And the only thing I could imagine was people thought I was actually going to make a real bomb on YouTube. So let me tell you right now, I will never post anything about making a real bomb on YouTube. That was just so bizarre that somebody would be like, I'll just videotape myself making a bomb. So anyway, I found some things to improve my castings, and I'll go ahead and show those through the video. And so here we go. Ever since I switched to Petrobond, I like it so much more. Green sand I always have to spray and keep feeling and see where it's at to make sure it has the right properties. But Petrobond seems to, for me, to hold pretty well. I keep it in a sealed bucket, and as you can see, the little brake test worked pretty good too. This is an improvement I did. I'll show it at the end of the video what talcum powder I bought. But I'm actually putting talcum powder on the parts this time. Not baby powder, but talcum powder. My baby powder seems to pick up moisture from the air, and the moisture causes the sand to stick to the parts. So hopefully using talcum powder will work a lot better. The other improvement I've done is a YouTuber told me to go ahead and paint the board that I was setting up my sand casting on. So I used epoxy spray paint on top of a good layer of a primer. And I'll tell you, man, I like it a lot better than the straight board. Not only, was it supposed to be keeping oils into the sand and not pulling it into the board, but it also keeps the board from flaking apart and getting particles into the sand. So there's a couple positives about getting your board painted. And this is how good talcum powder works. The parts literally just fell out. So I'm going to have to create a backing board when I pack up the sand, because every time I turn it over, if the parts fall out like that, I'm going to be in trouble. So I'm putting talc back on them, and I'm just using a little makeup brush to put it on rather than shaking it all over the place. The powder that I'm shaking now is baby powder. I decided to go ahead and keep using baby powder for the parting powder of the mold. Seems to work fine. I have no problems with it. And if I inhale something, I'd rather inhale the baby powder than the talcum powder. So from now, I think I'll use both. I think I'll brush on the talcum powder onto the patterns, and I'll go ahead and use the baby powder for the parting powder of the mold. I'm just dropping the sprue and spin trap in. I always use the tapered sprue. It seems to work pretty good. Keeps out the air from getting into it and keeps the turbulence down so I don't have bubbles. I think I'll just go ahead and keep using that. I have no problem with it. If you want more explanation of it, I've explained it more in my other videos. At this point, I'm just creating a basin so I can pour my aluminum in the basin and then have it slowly overfill into the sprue. I'll cut a little channel from the basin to the sprue. Since my patterns have a flat side on the back, I normally put the gates into the cope, which is the top half of the mold. This allows the aluminum to flow from the top to the back side of the part and it's a lot easier to grind down the back of the casting after I get it out of the mold rather than it is to grind it off the side and then trying to reshape it and make it look nice. So it's always easier just to have a ground back on the part rather than to actually try and reshape the side of it for wherever the gate went into. When I'm done cutting all the channels, you can see I'm blowing it off with air. That was recommended to me from another YouTuber, and I'll be doing that from now on. It's so nice not to have any little particles of sand floating around causing problems with your casting. Ever since I've been doing that, my castings have been a lot smoother rather than to have the pitting on them from loose sand floating around into the mold.
Hey. This is a cool part. It's not lava, it's cold metal. Bro, that's hot.
You can hear my son and his friend in the background talking and just watching what I'm doing. I think it's important for kids to see as much as they can. That way they can actually really appreciate stuff because they know how it was made and how much effort was used to engineer something or to manufacture something. So whenever I have a chance, I try and get my kid to watch whatever I'm doing and have him involved in it. Of course, pouring metal I don't want him involved in because I don't want him to get hurt. Here, I'm just taking a temperature. I'm trying to take the temperature every time I pour it so I can kind of get an idea of how the aluminum flows and how it hardens with the different surface finish on it depending on temperature. This time it was 1450 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, I just go ahead and do that for my benefit because once you have more idea of what's happening with the process, you can control it better.
Once that spills everywhere, that's a ton of hard work gone. That's the coolest part.
After I poured the aluminum, I always go ahead and make an ingot out of whatever I have left over. I don't usually make ingots just because, but I'll make them if I have anything left over. I also put the crucible back in so that way I won't have thermal shock and it will cool down extremely slow. Maybe that'll help the longevity of the crucible.
Is that a casting done?
And I put this shot in because I remember somebody one time asked if Petrobond has smoke because the oil, well, there you go.
209?
It's like, yeah, it's 209. So the 5-finger death punch casting turned out great. The only one that didn't turn out that great was my F-bomb. The fins had a little bit of a failure on them. At the end of the video, I'll go ahead and go over the failure analysis and talk about why I think it failed. Also, at the end of the video, like I promised, I'll show you the talcum powder that I used and where I got it, along with the types of spray paints I use on my patterns, and also the polishing compounds I use.
Yeah. Is it like 9 instead of...
So here's the final casting. I went ahead and cut the gates off. I sanded the back of it. I nicked the sides with the Dremel just a little bit to get off some nubs that somehow came out of the casting. And then this is the final product off the buffing wheel that I used polishing compounds on. Overall, it turned out really good. I thought the sand was going to get stuck in between the part that goes against your palm and one of the ring holes, but it slid right out. Also, the spikes came out pretty well too. So overall, this was a great casting. So going from left to right, the leftmost casting is the original casting I did off of my other video that was just titled F-Bomb. The casting in the middle is the one that I just did here. I think the tail fins failed on it because the aluminum, as it flowed back, cooled off, and it finally got to a point where it was so thin it cooled off too quickly, and that was the end of that. And to show that, I got a picture of when I opened the mold, so we'll go ahead and load that up and you can see why the tail fins failed. Here is the mold right after I opened it up, and you can see at the P on the 5-Finger Death Punch logo and close to the top of the bomb, that little thin trail that I used to release air out of the mold filled up, and it filled up pretty well. But towards the 5 on the Finger Death Punch logo and towards the end of the tail fins, you can see that the aluminum must have got cooled down because it didn't even go through the channels to the air holes, which normally in all my castings it does. So it does look like the aluminum cooled too quick. I think one problem is this is the first time I tried to pour 2 castings at the same time. And I think if I'm going to do that in the mold, I'm actually going to have to pour 2 separate, what do you call them, basins and sprues and everything in there, because it looks like when the aluminum had to divide and fill 2 molds that were pretty thin, it didn't fill them up fast enough and allowed the aluminum to cool too quick. So I think that'll be my last time trying to pull that one. And when I cast things, I think I'll have 1 sprue per pattern, and I won't end up having that happen. So hopefully next time my F-Bomb makes it out and gets its fins. So as I promised in the beginning of the video, one of the things that I use that I think is making my patterns even better is I still use the 2-in-1 filler and sandable primer. I always think that helps because it goes on a little thick and allows you to sand it down, and it also fills in gaps. It's really good for filling in gaps in your 3D prints, and then also it kind of cuts the corners and fills them in a little bit, so that way you have a little bit of an area that your sand can't get stuck in. The other spray paint that I just tried on this project was the Rust-Oleum Professional. I think it leaves a harder surface finish, and also it dries quicker, so I'll probably be using that one from now on. It sticks really good to the pattern. There's been some spray paints I use that actually start coming off because the sand kind of starts rubbing it off, but this is pretty good. This is the talcum powder I used on my parts. Like I said, I'm just using it on the parts. I think the baby powder works fine on parting of the mold itself. But I got this talcum powder off of Amazon. It was, I think, about $12 to $13 a pound, but really huge improvement. There is no comparison between talcum powder and baby powder. Like I said, baby powder will absorb water, and talcum powder, I mean, since that's what they've been using to cast, you know, the industry has been using to cast stuff for the longest time, it really does a good job, and there's, like I said, there's not much replacement for it. The baby powder is just not a replacement for the talcum powder I found out on this video. And lastly, these are the polishing compounds I used to go ahead and finish the casting up after I pulled it out and cut everything off of it and sanded it down. I got this off of Amazon. I think it was about 26 bucks, but anyway, you can see it actually goes from coarse to fine. You can see the chart on the left. It cuts through the aluminum really pretty quick. So it takes it from small surface imperfections. You know, you can use the black and work it up a little bit all the way to the blue, which is the finest. And again, it does a really good finish, and it does it fast too. Hey, thanks again for watching my video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Now that it's winter where I live, I'll be able to put out a lot more videos. So more are on their way. Thanks again.